I want to welcome everybody to the stand hall that's titled Domestic Violence and the African Woman. And we are so happy to have you here to discuss this integral thing that's happening in our society that amongst women, and not just women, but men as well, that nobody wants to talk about, nobody wants to highlight. And this is, we are actually having this town hall in this wonderful month of March to celebrate the Women's International Month. And the theme for this Women's Month is actually the valiant women of the vote refusing to be silenced. And we want to highlight that domestic violence is something that we should refuse to be silenced about. We should talk about it. We should, highlight it. We should let other people know what we're going through. And let's not think that domestic violence is only one face. It's different faceted. It comes with different angles. And that is why we want you to, sit back and listen, participate, and engage, because this is an important discussion that we need to have on a daily basis. There are people out there, women, men, that need to speak up and not be silenced. Welcome once more to our town hall, and we hope that we will have a wonderful deliberation together. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ethel Metzger, a member of the ECHOS Africa board as well. And again, thank you very much for spending your Saturday morning with us. I'll go on to introduce ECHOS Africa. ECHOS Africa Initiatives is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization dedicated to improving the lives of women and girls of African descent by championing their cause, equipping them with the necessary information, education, and empowerment with which they should navigate their peculiar situations. We research challenges that adversely affect our vulnerable population's ability to live quality lives. We advocate for them to relevant stakeholders and the public. We design and undertake projects targeted at enlightening and keeping them informed while intervening by creating opportunities for empowerment through which they can successfully address their situation. Our mission is to work with people of African descent in New York and Africa to end social injustice. We envision a world of equity where Black women and children are not left behind. We value social impact, building a community, driving change, good stewardship, and excellence. For more information or to donate, please check us out at echosafricainitiatives.org. Also, follow us on Facebook, ECHOS Africa Initiatives, and subscribe to our channel, ECHOS Africa TV on YouTube. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the board of ECHOS Africa Initiatives and also warmly welcome each and every one of you who have joined us today. Thank you.
So in line with our commitment to advocate for and to help improve the situations of women of African descent, we have put together this event, and it couldn't come at a better time. As you all know, March is a month dedicated to women across the globe annually. This year's theme is of call to action all over the world is Choose to Challenge. Domestic violence is one of the major problems that stand in the way of women's abilities to reach their potential today. And we at ECHOS Africa have brought it to the table so we can learn, and at the end, we hope that we choose to challenge any and everything that stand in the way of our development. The three speakers who graciously volunteered their time for this event will tackle the issue of domestic violence from different angles. We hope that everyone present here today will learn something new and choose to challenge the act of domestic violence. This is not the only meeting that we'll have. We have more conversations on these issues to come. We ask that you leave your email in the chat and also include your Facebook name or link so that we can send you invitation or more information about our initiative and also our mentorship program. So I will be your moderator today, along with Ms. Etheline, and some housekeeping rules, things to keep in mind. Please drop your questions in the chat. If you have questions for the speaker as they speak, drop it in the chat. At the end of all the speakers, we'll go through the questions and relay them to the speakers. Also, make sure you stay muted. You're more than welcome to turn on your camera, but we ask that you stay muted so that we can hear clearly from every speaker. So now, with nothing else to do, we'll go on to our first speaker.
So our very first speaker is Dr. Hadiza Osuji, who is a public health professional with a background in community health education and promotion and a focus on African families and communities in New York City. She is the founder and executive director of African International Collaborative Center, AICC, which is a nonprofit organization focused on promoting African culture and ethnic pride, serving as a hub for resources for African immigrant community, conducting research, developing and implementing culturally relevant programs, collaborating with and advising institutions, community and faith-based organizations, as well as policymakers to empower and enhance the well-being of African women, African youth, and African families in New York City, consequently building stronger and healthier African immigrant families and community. Dr. Osuji also serves as an adjunct lecturer at the New York University Silver School of Social Work. Prior to this, she was the Chief Program Officer at the New York University Max Silva Institute for Poverty Policy and Research, and concurrently served as the Vice Chair of the Max Silva Institute's Community Collaborative Board. Over the years, she has engaged in developing and implementing program interventions to improve family relationships and processes in order to strengthen African immigrant families, thereby reducing gender role strain, and the risk of intimate partner or domestic violence among Africans. And so I turn it over to Dr. Osuji. The floor is yours now.
Thank you so much, Etienne. Thank you, Echoes of Africa, for having me and inviting me. And just like Meg had mentioned, and I'm not saying the names of everybody, this is actually, I mean, there is no better time to talk about this issue. And of course, domestic violence, it didn't just start. It has been an issue that has been plaguing, not only across the world, but also, in Africa. And it is an issue that hits, close to home. And I am sure if I ask everyone here, probably if personally, individually, one has not gone through some level of domestic violence, a sister, a brother, a cousin, a nephew, back in Nigeria, in Africa, who has gone through some level of domestic abuse. So I want to thank Echoes of Africa, Ify, Victor, and the Echoes of Africa board members for having me and continue to raise this, awareness and talk about this issue. As we all know, it is very important. It is very, relevant. So I thank you for this, opportunity. And so I will be talking about domestic violence and the African woman, the role of culture, religion, and community. Well, that is the task I am given today. So I hope I do, justice to that. Before I begin, let me just fix, my screen so I can see what I'm talking about, my slides. Okay. So, So just to give a little bit of, perspective, or to actually give a definition of, domestic violence, because in our community, in the African community, is just probably looked upon as if just the battery, right? When, when a man beats up his wife, that is just what domestic violence is. So just I will talk a little bit about what domestic violence is, defined or described by CDC, and also talk a little bit about, give a little bit of background about domestic violence and a little bit of statistics about, the importance, the prevalence of this issue. Because it cuts across, not only the world, it cuts across, Africa. And it cuts across, socioeconomic status, educational status, ethnic, racial, boundaries. And it has been rising, and it's really an issue of concern, and that warrants this kind of ongoing, platform to continue to talk about it and bring awareness to the issue. So according to CDC, domestic violence, is the sexual violence, the physical violence, the psychological abuse, as well as stalking, that an intimate partner, perpetrate against another intimate partner. So basically, that is what it is. So it consists of, this largely, and this definition actually varies probably from country to country, or even within the United States, it varies from state to state. But according to the CDC, which is, a well-established, a base or hub for our reference, is that, it encompasses physical violence, sexual violence, stalking, and psychological aggression. Just I would like to go through, each, so that we will have, and I'm sure if not all of us, most of us know this already, but just to reiterate it, and so that those who are not aware to have a better understanding when we're talking about domestic violence. It's not just the physical aspect of it, but then it also covers, other areas that we really need to be, aware of it. So it encompasses, like I had mentioned earlier, physical violence, which includes, scratching, pushing, or shoving. Most of the time, when the intimate partner or the perpetrator gets wound up, and get it into that violent mode, the pushing, the scratching, the shoving, throwing, grabbing, or biting. I have come across so many so many how will I say, couple who that have been involved in domestic violence, who had, complained and mentioned, oh, when he was beating me up, he beat me, he bit my nipples, or he grabbed my hand and bit my hand, and there was this, huge mark on the arm. So domestic violence, includes that. Choking. A lot of the time also you see when when the woman is, usually the woman in this case, is subjected to battery, often she is choked. The aggressive shaking, the aggressive hair pulling, slapping, punching, hitting, all of that. And another, thing is the use of a weapon. The weapon of choice usually is either they go for a knife or a gun. More than 90% of the killings that have resulted from domestic violence was by a weapon, and using a gun. Use of restraints on one's body size or strength. We see, so, in most cases whereby the intimate partner, it could be. Now, when I say intimate partner in this case, it refers to either the current or former husband. So in other words, the current husband or an ex-husband, fiancé, boyfriend, yeah, somebody you're living with, and probably going out with, and stuff like that. So, and so, of course, the men are usually kind of a bigger. In some cases, though, we have, our really our ladies who are also equally of equal size, but men are usually bigger and stronger, and with that they used to threaten and intimidate, right? Restraining you, especially when that violence is about to set in. So that is, also that also constitutes physical violence. Physical violence also includes coercing other people to commit any of the above acts. coercing other people in the sense that, like there are some family situations, right, whereby, and sometimes we get this, because in Africa, when you're married to the whole family, right? And my husband's sister came, my husband's brother, my wife's sister, my cousin, So, and sometimes, this family members, unfortunately, if the couple are from, bad, in quote, family, they tend to give, all sorts of, advices that are detrimental to the marital, to the couple, especially maybe instigating the husband, painting the woman probably in some kind of, negative light, that the husband now become instigated and becomes an accomplice and begin to abuse the wife. So any kind of coercing from other people to commit this above acts of scratching, pushing, shoving, throwing, grabbing, choking, shaking aggressively, and all of that, that also constitute, an aspect of physical violence. Another aspect which I had mentioned earlier is, sexual violence. Now, under sexual violence, you have 5 categories. One of them, of course, is rape. I'm not going to go into that. Everybody knows what, rape is all about. Then the unwanted sexual contact. In other words, unwanted touching, sometimes touching the boobs, touching, sexually, that, the woman don't want. That constitutes sexual violence. Victim was forced to penetrate someone else. You'll find that there are some situations or relationships whereby, and usually this is between it usually occurs between boyfriend and girlfriend and stuff like that. And if unfortunately the lady winds up in the wrong hand, the man might, through some pervert reason, will want her to have unwanted sex that she don't want to have, with another person, right? So also, the 5th one is non-contact, unwanted sexual experiences. Sometimes, the woman is subjected to watching pornography by force. Probably that is a form of arousal for the man. And sometimes, they take the nude pictures and they disseminate the nude pictures on social media or whatever way, they do that. That is a form of sexual violence. And we see, these cases where even on WhatsApp and so to speak, some men, what they do now, especially if probably the lady is trying to, let go of the relationship, or they're having some kind of disagreement or what have you, but rather than, just cut off the relationship, they now go into a vindictive mode, and they go and try to coerce the lady into probably having sexual contact, and in the process take nude pictures of this lady and then now disseminate it on the social media, which is, an act of sexual violence. And then the 4th one, which is stalking. Stalking, essentially, we all know it. There are some guys who, in fact, 24 hours, they are calling, where are you? Want to know where you are, what you're doing, how you're doing it. Sometimes, and these are not the phone calls, the lady wants, the partner is not, don't want all of this happening. And then also following, in some cases, trailing her to find out where she is going or where she is entering. If she says she's going where she is going, spying on her, sneaking into her home, and making threats, either physical harm or, to the victim. And, like she might come home, oh, where have you been? You left us so and time, and you're coming back at this, time, where you think, if you have a hidden agenda, let me better warn you. I'm going to deal with you. I'm going to get you. I'm gonna you will know who I am, that sort of thing. So that constitute violence. Stalking constitute an act of domestic violence. And then the 4th and final one under the category of domestic violence is psychological aggression. Psychological aggression, it's not essentially it's not by physical, the man don't have to beat you and all of that, but the way he behaves and the way he treats you, you just messes up, the psychology. And sometimes it involves, some will just the name calling, you witch, you ashewo, of course, meaning whore, prostitute, all these humiliating names, derogative names, name calling, as of course, they kind of have an impact, psychologically and mentally, causing stress and emotional trauma on the lady. And again, exploitation of victims' vulnerability that we see often, in developed countries, whereby if you see all over the world, the majority of migrants to developed worlds are from Africa. And usually, and also during, especially, and most of the time, the men come before the women, and then later, the women join them. And when the women now join them, sometimes, unfortunately, if it happens that she's coming to meet a man by his nature who is an abuser or violent in nature, and probably there is sort of a strain in the relationship. Now, what happens is usually the perpetrator, now the partner, uses this immigration status as a weapon, as a tool, to abuse the lady. And sometimes, because in any little thing, whatever she does, if she coughs or he talks and he doesn't like the way she's talking, and she talks in a challenging manner, you say, oh, you're talking to me like that, don't worry, I'm going to send you back. You're talking to me like, I'm going to call the immigration officers on you. And that, tend to traumatize, and of course, psychologically, have a negative impact on the lady. So all, this forms of abuse, physical violence, sexual violence, psychological abuse, and stalking, all this aspect of it, if we say all the, constitute domestic violence. So it's not just, it's not just that when a man hit or beat you, that is what domestic violence. So when a man is hitting, doing all these other things, the psychological abuse, the stalking, but not necessarily beating you, and you think that is not domestic violence, well, that's domestic violence. Now, with regards to, now to talk a little bit about the background and give, before we go into the role of culture, religion, and community, a little bit of background about, the prevalence, and really to look at, not just that we are saying it's important, but that evidence suggests, that this is an issue of concern. Now, and domestic violence, studies have shown that it's becoming increasingly a public issue of concern across Africa, globally and across Africa. And also it shows that, evidence shows that 1 in 4 women will experience, now domestic violence is used interchangeably as intimate partner violence. So 1 in 4 women will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. 1 in 4. When you have 4 women, 1 will surely experience violence. And of course, such violences, and that is why domestic violence is not just a public issue, but it is a public health issue of great concern, because from the domestic violence leads to, trauma, injuries, physical and health problems, including depression and, psychological trauma, and it leads to death as well. And it leads to dysfunctionality, of course, and when there's dysfunctionality in the family, there's dysfunctionality in the community. The kids are affected, everyone is affected. So it's not only a public issue of concern, it's a public health issue of concern as well. And warrants this kind of platform, warrants this, this ongoing discussion to make sure and put in all hands on deck to try to ameliorate this issue of concern. In addition, a report from the National Center now, getting closer to home with regards to Africans, a report from the National Center for Victims of Crime found that among Black women specifically, approximately 41% have experienced physical abuse. Approximately 54% had experienced psychological abuse. And so you can see these rates, these numbers, they are not little. Now, 41, that is almost less than half of the women of women have experienced. Well, this actually is on the national scale. Well, and talking specifically of Black women, about half have experienced physical abuse, and more than half of the women have experienced psychological abuse. 1 in 2 female murder victims are killed by their intimate partner. Talking about love, right? Love does not hurt. But unfortunately, when you have 2 women, 1 out of the 2 women that have been murdered, 1 was murdered by her intimate partner. And 92% of these killings were interracial. In other words, it's Black crime against Black, Black man against Black woman, and vice versa. So it is really an issue, of concern. Also, and as we're talking about this, as I know some of the men with us, and maybe the men that may be listening to us might like, yeah, you're talking about, women getting abused. It is the men that are perpetrating the violence, but the women can be violent too, and women are perpetrating the violence. Why are you focusing on women alone? That's a very good question, or a question, because yes, you are right. The domestic violence is not perpetrated, by men alone. Women also subject their men to abuse, be it physical violence, sexual violence, stalking, or psychological violence. Women do that, too. But then why we are focusing really on the women is because despite, women do it because women have their issues. Yeah, they do it, but then the rate is significantly higher than, with men than with women. The vast majority of intimate partner violence is perpetrated by men against women. And if we look at the statistics, 76% of intimate partner violence is perpetrated by men as compared to 24%. And that is why, I'm sure then you men will agree that, the women it needs to be focused on. So, and also, women are 6 times more likely than men to be killed by a current or former partner. 6 times more likely. 96% of the murder-suicide victims as a result of IPV, intimate partner violence, are female. And so, yes, that is why we are focusing on female. And yes, and we are, it is Women's Day, and that is even most important why, or Women's Month, that is most importantly why we are focusing on women. So moving along real quickly, and even across Africa, this rate is significant. That is, if we just say we're going to focus on Africa. Africa, globally also, this domestic violence, it's really, it's more prevalent in Africa than, in most parts of the world. The rate in, across Africa is 36%. So it is even 6% exceeding the global average, which is 30%. right? So not only is the issue of concern, but the issue is also very significant and of concern within the African, within the African, how will I say, community, countries, etc. I think I went back. Okay. I went back a little bit. So now this part, then the efforts that has been going on, the protections that have been put in place by policymakers, and despite the fact that, there are also some NGOs that are doing great work in this area, especially, around physical violence, which is wife beating. The domestic violence is still remains and is still increasing. And this is largely due to because of the underreporting, right? And underreporting, we women, as particularly African women, we hardly, report the violence or the abuse that we are going through, in our homes because of fear of retaliation, either from the husband or either from our partners or from the wider family, even from the community at large. Also, due to the culture of silence surrounding domestic violence, there is a hush, whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? You don't need to, take it out. You don't need to complain. You just absorb it. He is the man, right? And what he says goes in the house. And also the shame and stigma attached to such cases. And usually you find that, and that also, perpetrates the culture of silence because of the stigma that follows it when a woman tries to talk about it, when a woman's trying to voice out, that she's been abused by her husband. Sometimes even she will complain to her family members, and the family will be like, what did you do? Right? It's fine. Just go back and take it. He is the man, and just try not to make him angry. Right? And if she attempts to do otherwise, go against gender norms, she is considered as a useless woman, an unfit a woman, and then she is, called all sorts of names. She can't even keep her marriage. And look at, she is divorced. All that sort of things, and that continues to plague, the African woman suffering in silence. And just like I had mentioned, familial community pressure, also, the informal system, justice, reconciliation, all these things, just reduce, and it makes the effort of curbing this issue, it makes it a daunting task. The fear of social retaliation, harassment, or further violence for offenders. And sometimes, the women also, because the man has so threatened the woman, like, if she says it or tries to do otherwise, that in fact, that will be her end. And that always, tend to keep the woman, keep her shush, and that hinders the progress, that ought to be made. So, and these all need to be taken a note of, and that is why I applaud Echoes of Africa, Ify, Victor, and the members, the board members, in taking this step, because this is really an important and crucial step to be, letting people know and to help to change that, mindset, that it is okay it's okay to seek for help. It is okay to talk about it. And when a woman talks about it, a woman should not be, there shouldn't be any stigma, attached to it. The woman should not be castigated for no, for no fault of her own, just because she wants to get out of an abusive situation and don't want to be beaten, don't want to be battered, don't want to be psychologically abused. We all need to, come together. It's not an individual problem, it's, community problem. It's, a general problem that we need to come together and, support, women who come forth and try to, lend a helping hand in, and also in addressing this issue with all, in whatever side or shape or form it is coming, it's coming from. So with that being said, now I will go quickly into, the role of culture in domestic violence. First of all, I would probably add that, culture does not influence domestic violence. I mean, it does not, but rather the abuse, or the misconception of what, of the cultural beliefs and attitudes. I think that is what, fuels domestic violence. So for the prevalence of DV, like I'd mentioned, cuts across social economic situation and is deeply embedded in cultures. It is embedded in cultures, it is endemic in cultures around the world, so much that millions of women consider it a way of life. At some point, you see that, okay, first of all, there's a cultural belief that, the woman, I mean, the man is the head of the household, yes, and but whatever he says goes, and the woman cannot challenge, his authority. If she is to talk, if she should, excuse me, if she should talk, contrary to his precepts, so to speak, that becomes a problem. That becomes a huge problem. So, and there is the cultural belief that, even though the culture is suggesting the woman should be submissive, but it's not that the woman now should be, the culture is not telling the man, oh, because you're the head of the household, because, you're to take care of your family. After all, if you're the head of the household, that only means that you need to take care of your family. And how does care and violence go together? How does loving your family and violence go together? They don't go together. But the unfortunate thing is that not only is the culture misconstrued, but also, or misconceived, but also traditional beliefs. Let me just take, for instance, the traditional belief that men have the right to control, or no, not only is the culture misconstrued, but that widely, a significant number of women are condoning it. Because as you find out, a significant number of women feel that, oh, if they go out of line, yes, then if the man disciplines them, oh, yes, then if the man slaps you here and there, you deserve it. I mean, that's okay. And so, and even modern societies today, you find that, at least, they tolerate some level of violence against women. Listen, women have issues. We're not here to say women don't have issues. Yeah, women do have issues. And listen, some women can really make you cringe. You know what I mean? But, irrespective, no matter what, no matter what, it doesn't warrant a woman to have to be subjected to physical abuse, sexual abuse, or psychological abuse, right? So, and if you see that 51%, there are some studies who have shown that 51% of African women report that being beaten by their husbands is justified if they either go out without permission, if they neglect the children, if they argue with him back and forth, which, we tend to do anyway, and if they refuse to have sex, and, maybe he when you were trying to talk to him for some, he left without saying anything, and you're trying to call him all day, you don't reach him, you ask for something, he refused to give, you're trying to have a conversation, but his mind is somewhere else. And then in the night he comes, he wants to make love. That is not, well, let me say, have sex. And in fact, you are not interested in that. So that if you refuse him that, then, well, if he wants to discipline you by some form of physical violence or some form of sexual violence, then that makes it okay. If you burn the food, that makes it okay. So you find that, because of the cultural attitudes and cultural beliefs, yes, the man is supposed to be the head of the household. The man is supposed to take care and nurture his family. The man is supposed to protect and look after his family. How does that come into play? How is that in tandem with violence? The two don't go together. And then if the two are coming to play, then there's obviously something wrong. And then it's unfortunate if we as women now, or let me not say we as men, if a number of women feel that is okay, in whatever capacity the violence is issued or not. A quick story, which this one was in the media, it was in the news, it was a huge story, it is a true story, was in December 1999, a Kenyan police officer. This is a police officer. And that is why earlier on I said, domestic violence, it cuts across religion. It cuts across education. It cuts across economic status. The Kenyan police officer, his name is Felix Nthiwa Munayo. He got home late and demanded meat for his dinner. There was none in the house. Enraged, he beat his wife. His wife's name is Betty Kavada. He paralyzed this woman, and the woman and brain damaged. Miss Kavada died 5 months later on her 28th birthday. And why? Because he felt, how dare he come home and his meal is served and there is no meat as the head of the household, because of the cultural, beliefs and attitudes that has been misconstrued. And so you find that violence against women is often justified when women do not follow the traditional gender roles or norms. Even it's happening, as with African immigrants here in the United States. When the woman comes, right now, the man, there is certain expectations, the man is expecting the woman now, as it is back home in Africa, of course, to cook, to clean, take care of the children, take care of him as well. But then now when the woman comes in and now needs to go to school, and in addition to school, needs to go to work. Because I remember, when I came to, I was going to school, I was working full-time. I was working full-time, I was doing my master's. I was working full-time, did my PhD. And so in those kind of roles, believe you me, so I go to work from morning till 5 p.m. And then I stay at work from 6 to do my assignment to go to school. So I was going to Columbia. When I come home, immediately I drop my bag, maybe change or grab something to eat, and I dash out back to class for my evening classes at Columbia for my master's program. And for my PhD, after work, I stay, in the office to study, to do my assignments. And I get home like 9, 10 p.m. It is a sacrifice. And without a supportive husband, trust me, there is going to be very difficult for the woman to escape some level of domestic violence. Because then, and it requires some, because why? Something has to give. And what was giving? I couldn't be at home enough to make sure dinner is ready for my husband. I couldn't be home in time for certain things that needed to be done in the house. And then after the master's or the PhD, and now your status is elevated, you now have a bigger job, you now have a bigger paying job. Any little thing you do, if you do not sit properly in the house, and you probably sit and cross your leg, the man who is not secured, who has this, who is egocentric and feel, has really this deep-rooted cultural thing, pride that I am the head of the household, and because you're making money, if you say one sentence that is not right, oh, you feel you are making money now. Oh, you feel you're a doctor now, so you feel I will be talking, you can talk back, right? You know, and before you know it, no, it is not like that. I was just trying to explain what? Well, what do you want? Oh, now you're making money. And before you know it, physical violence result. You come home, perhaps you've been working all day, you are tired, you know, exhausted. The last thing on your mind that particular time is to, you know, to have some kind of physical, sexual contact. And he comes want to have sex and you don't feel like, oh, you are now a doctor, you now have money, you're making money, you know, I come and you know, you are pushing me away, you are telling me no. How dare you? So all, you know, this cultural, you know, things, and it all goes really, and it's all, you know, playing, you know, just it's just the mindset. And usually because the culture, you know, the culture tends to fuel this sort of ego and pride in our Black men. Sometimes, unfortunately, they take it to the next level or abuse it. And, you know, and what results really with that is, you know, the domestic violence. There is this story of Janet, that I'm showing here on the slide. Janet Akinyi is Kenyan. It's a case, you know, she filed in 2006, she filed for divorce and custody, and filed for custody of her children after her husband attempted to kill her with a knife. She had endured violent beatings for 10 years. She's been enduring it. But there comes a point, despite, you know, whatever is going on, you say, oh, unless you are willing to just keep absorbing and go to the grave with this, you know, with the violence that you've been subjected to, enough is enough. But, and then what she said that he would say, it is the only way. He beats her up, and this physical violence or abusive nature that he's unleashing on the woman. And what often he tells her is that is his way to teach her to respect him as the head of the household, as the male head, as the male figure. And all this is really misunderstanding, because if the man understands he is the head of the household, he is supposed, you know, to cherish and love the wife and play that supporting role. But no. And sometimes when a woman is, you know, when a woman gains some level of independence, the man, unfortunately, who is not really secured, feels threatened. His ego feels the ego is threatened, the pride is threatened, he feels his manhood is threatened. And how does he resolve that? Unfortunately, in some cases, if not most cases, is by, you know, abusive acts. And you find that, you know, in some cases, because of culture, when you are married, stay in your husband's house. Don't come, whatever is in Vegas stays in Vegas. When they report this issue to their family members, the family members often, what they say is, you know, just, it's going to be okay. Just, what did you do to him? You must have done something to, I mean, we all know the story. You must have done something to him to warrant him to beat you into a pulp. So whatever it is you are doing, you need to stop. Go back to your house. Whatever it is you are doing, you need to stop doing it. And don't come back here again complaining. And God forbid, should the man be like an influential man, I mean, is a rich man, you know, has some money, and he's sort of catering for the family in some aspect, and you being abused in the house and come to say, my husband is abusing me. God forbid that. Nobody wants to hear that. If he's abusing you, then you need to continue to go and be, you know, and be living that abuse, because you're not going to take the bread from our table, which is a very, you know, unfortunate incident. And now moving on to religious, the role of religion. Now, religion, and of course, you know, the religious teachings tend to serve as a resource to assist those who have experienced abuse in finding safety, in finding, and in their process of healing. Because sometimes, you know, women who have been subjected to abuse or violence, what happens usually when probably they go to church or the pastors prays, it sort of help them with the, to cope. It helps them deal with whatever it is they're going through. And it also provides a space for them to release whatever emotional trauma they're harboring, or whatever psychological issue that is going on in their heads. It helps them to release. But then the unfortunate thing is that religion also, just like culture, can be misused and used as an excuse to condone abusive behavior. There is a popular, teaching or text in the Bible that men always love to latch on. I have not seen a man, but perhaps very few, love to latch on. And I'm sure if I ask you, everybody is going to mention it. Wives, be submissive to your husbands. That is a popular teaching in the Bible. And then most men, they grab that, that sentence alone. They grab it, run with it, abuse it, and misuse it. But what followed? Husband, love your wives. Like I had mentioned, can love and violence go together? When you love your wife, there is no way you can abuse your wife. So now a majority of women will be dealing with some aspect of religious belief and teachings, which will serve as either a resource or a roadblock. So religious teachings, if used correctly, will serve as a resource and would help if both parties are willing participants, will help to address the issue. But unfortunately, you find that most of the time, rather, it is used as an excuse, and it is misused. And in that way, it then serves as a roadblock. And then now fueling, domestic violence. And finally, with regards to the community, domestic violence, like I had mentioned earlier, is not an issue just for women. It is a problem affecting, and we all know, whatever is affecting a woman really affects the community. A lot of NGOs that are combating domestic violence against women have been doing their best, and they've been doing good work. And here we are, just an example, Echoes of Africa hosting this platform, right? This is a step in the right direction, but the harsh reality still remains. You find that it's in places in developed countries, such as in Africa, in Nigeria, for example, poverty is endemic. And poverty, sometimes, fuels, domestic violence, in the sense that when the man finds out he's put in a situation where he is hardly or can hardly provide for the family, the man gets frustrated. And the man now goes and start engaging in drinking. And when he engages in drinking, of course, your mental health is impaired. And if the wife challenges whatever he's saying or his authority, she gets beat up that day. So, and then weak community sanctions against intimate partner violence. For example, even your neighbors. Sometimes you find that, like, back home where you have face me and face you, or where you have, houses, neighbors, when neighbors see a woman being subjected to some violence, be it physical violence or what have you, most of the time, nobody intervenes. Nobody tries to say anything. So unwillingness of neighbors to intervene in situations where they witness violence is another unfortunate matter. There is a recent a video that was sent to me. This is a true story that happened. Actually, my brother sent it to me. What happened? This lady, she's been at home. The husband has not been coming home, and she was wondering. And then she will be asking. She will be calling him, and then the response she got back from her husband was that he is living with his girlfriend. And if she wants, to see him, or if she wants to be with him, she ought to move and come and live with him and the girlfriend. That is, and then recently also, there is another woman who the husband left her to go and marry a second, I don't know whether it's to marry a second wife or he went to marry another wife. And this woman, just like we're saying, women do have their issues, but then, this woman now killed their 3 children just to get back at her husband, because the husband loves the kids so much. In retaliation for leaving her or for going to get another woman, she killed the 3 kids. So yeah, it is true. Like I had mentioned earlier, the violence, it comes, there's 2 sides of the coin. And women really have their own share, because sometimes, the man will be talking and the woman will be, pointing at his face and like yelling at him too, shouting at, what can you do? And especially when the woman has gained some certain level of independence. She actually sometimes feel, oh, she can talk to the man anyhow. And if the man says A, she says A, B, C, D, because yeah, so what you gonna do? Which unfortunately, should not be the case. But then that is the reality of our days. So despite the fact that women do have their issues, and really, when we want to run our mouth, we can really run our mouth to provocation. But despite that, we do have our issues, we do have our problems, but we have seen, and studies have shown, that a significant number, we're looking about almost 80% of domestic violence is perpetrated by the man. And that is why the focus really is on the man. So Ify, with that being said, I thank you, and I am sure, my other speakers are going to take it, in another level with regards to, the different forms of, abuse and whatever the issues that is going on, in our community. So with that, I will, really round up and just say, and I would like to close with actually the words of Ms. Safiya Kaga. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. She is the UNFPA's Director of Information. And she said, too many women are subjected to violence and made to feel shame for crimes committed against them. Crimes committed against you, yet you are made to feel shame. You are made to be hush-hush, about it. The real shame, Ms. Kaga said, on International Women's Day, the real shame, she said, belongs to a world that allows such crimes to continue. It is the responsibility of the government and society as a whole to condemn violence against women and to take action to eliminate it. It is the responsibility. It's actually, but I will add, it is an individual responsibility. It is the responsibility of the community, then the government and society at large to put all hands on deck to make sure and to address this issue. Because domestic violence has health implication. It affects the children, it affects, the family, it affects the community as a whole. It affects, the proper functioning of the family, affects, the functioning of the community. Ms. Kaga said, such change can only be achieved through dialogue and debate, advocacy, community participation, and concerted mobilization of civil society. And this is one of the things that make me so, glad and happy to be here and really to honor this invitation and to, give kudos to Echoes of Africa for this platform as we continue to make efforts to bring change to this, issue. Thank you very much. Thank you. I hand over to, the moderator.
Thank you so much, Dr. Osuji. Once again, please make sure you're putting your questions in the chat. At the end of all the speakers, we'll go to the questions. So our next speaker is Ms. Gina Onyanga. She's a licensed clinical social worker who works with individuals to address trauma and organizations to amplify their program development, resources, and service delivery so they can make influential impact on the world. With a robust experience ranging from child welfare, behavioral health, domestic violence, homelessness, transitional housing, as well as higher and early education, Gina is committed to serving communities that do not have easy access to quality mental health. With over 10 years of experience in social work and a knack for making meaningful connections with consumers and an insatiable appetite for helping others maximize their potential, Gina knows how to connect and provide information that is objective and may offer a different perspective so that others can effectively do the same. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here. So I was tasked to talk about the cycle of abuse created by Dr. Lenore Walker. She was a professor of psychology that really delved her research in the 1970s just to study family violence. She interviewed thousands of women and felt as though there was a common theme amongst the stories that they shared with her. So I'll take you on a journey of the cycle of abuse. She breaks it down into 4 stages, but I'd like to read a short article, one paragraph from an article of a Nigerian woman at the age of 24, but reflecting on societal pressures at that age. At 22, it is common for an average Nigerian lady to have completed her university studies. Every male friend her family member sees her with is a suspected potential suitor. During this period, many of her friends would have started getting married, and she would have been on the bridal train of most. The pressure for her to get married increases. Sooner or later, she would have to bend to the pressure that society put on her. In Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, it is said that it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. The Nigerian version of this statement would be that a young single lady having completed her university education must be in want of a husband. No one asked the lady what does she want to do with her life by the age of 25, as much as they would ask her for the date she would be getting married. Marriage becomes the apex of achievement of a lady who bends to the pressure of this society. Just want to have you keep that in mind as an underlying thought that a young 20-year-old woman may be walking around with. So Dr. Lenore Walker, the first stage in the cycle of abuse is tension building. So let's take it from this perspective of meeting a man, you're in your young 20s, you're hopeful about your future, and you're trying to set the stage for you to achieve this type of success in life. And you're hoping that this man is going to be your husband and the relationship goes well. The first stage is tension building. Now there's a shift in the relationship and you don't know where it's really coming from. There may be some external factors that are shared. Okay, work is stressful. Family right now is very stressful. Or I just got diagnosed with high blood pressure. I'm having headaches. That's the stress. Or sometimes, as Dr. Asoji mentioned, maybe it's internal issues in the relationship that are being the catalyst for why there's some type of discomfort in the relationship. Maybe you don't cook this well. I don't like the way you talk back to me. I don't want you to challenge my directives at all. And as the Bible says, you do need to be submissive. How will we move forward if these things aren't at play? Which leaves the survivor on the other end of trying to alleviate these type of pressures. What can I do to alleviate the discomfort that's happening in this relationship right now? Sometimes it can be a fixated moment where you're trying to figure out what it is that you can do to make things change in this first phase. Moving on to the second phase now, the incident of abuse finally happens. tension builds up and the abuser has to find a way to establish some type of power and control. And the abuse can look very different. It could be sexual abuse. It could be physical violence. It could be insult or name calling. It could be threats of harm or destructing property, emotional manipulation, or even blaming the victim for pushing the perpetrator over the edge and insinuating this moment of abuse of happening. It's important to keep in mind that people choose to abuse others. Any tension that they may experience externally or internally may help explain the abuse, but never should be the reason why it's excused. Moving on to the second stage in this cycle of abuse, reconciliation. This is the moment of, I'm sorry, if it wasn't for work, if it wasn't for, stress for family, if it wasn't for, me having these headaches because now I have high blood pressure, if it wasn't for all these other reasons, except for taking accountability for the action, this is the phase where that is showing up. It's never an actual apology and real accountability for causing harm, but highlighting the external factors that led the perpetrator to this moment. The victim at the time could be thinking about what we discussed so far. Culturally, I'm at this stage in life where I'm supposed to be working on getting a husband. I'm hearing that marriage is hard. Maybe this is something to prepare me for the future. Religion. Maybe this is a moment where I do exercise forgiveness. I mean, Peter did ask God, how many times do you forgive? And it's 70 times 7, and this is 1. So maybe at this moment, I choose to forgive because this is where I want to grow in life. And community. I'm already in my early 20s. Everyone's asking me what type of food is going to be served at my wedding, and I don't have an answer yet. So maybe I stay and I accept the apology because there's all these other factors that come into play. And he said sorry. So this is where, we are. And in this moment, there's a lot of gestures of love shown. There's the kind words, there's the gestures, there's, all these things that could make a person feel good as the victim, and also releases extra oxytocin and dopamine in the system, which are your hormones that make you feel good, which could also help move reconciliation to be successful. And right after reconciliation comes the stage of calm. At this point, both parties have come up with a reason as to why the abuse happened. So they're both in a space of, okay, the abuse happened because he was stressed at work, or his family keeps asking him for things and he was stressed out because of that, or he's adjusting to this new physical illness that happened and it wasn't his fault. So they both come to the terms of accepting there was something that happened that made this happen, and it'll probably never happen again. And in this stage, it has to be justified. Wait 1 second to get my notes. Then at this point, the cycle repeats again. This is what Dr. Walker's research was about. This cycle is going to repeat again and may manifest in different ways. Maybe it's not showing up as tension building first. Maybe it's the first step is an incident of abuse and everything else comes after. So keeping in mind that it's not, it doesn't show up the same way every single time. Because of this, her research was challenged in that way. It left loopholes to have people look at it so structurally in terms of these 4 things happen right after each other, and leaves room to blame the victim. So if you're in reconciliation stage and you know that the calm stage is next, that is ample time for you to decide your exit, and left questions as far as, well, why didn't you leave at that point? You knew what stage was coming next. And her research was also challenged because it only talked about heterosexual relationships, where it left other relationships, even between family or same sex, weren't considered to be a part of this cycle of abuse. It also left room not to consider other factors as far as financial abuse, making sure that if the victim decided that they want to leave, they don't have the finances to do it. I've seen it go as far as ruining someone's credit, so that even if they wanted to try to get another apartment or try to sign off on anything else, they couldn't, because their credit was so poor, based on the abuser's tactics to make sure that it would be hard for them to leave at all costs. So we cannot ignore that in most of the cases, in all cases, honestly, that the responsibility for the abuse lies with the abuser. And abuse is complicated, often very difficult to recognize and escape. Learning to identify these keys, these essential areas of concern highlighted by Dr. Walker, just helps victims to identify certain traits to make a decision sooner than later. That's it for me. I know we have to leave time for Mr. Adams.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Gina. That was very insightful. Great for thought there. Yeah. Yes. So we definitely will asking everyone to post their questions on the chat, or so that we would like this to be a very lively discussion. So please post your questions on the chat so that we can ask the speakers, so they can give us so that we can really have a robust discussion. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Gene Adams, and he's a licensed social worker with decades of experience in the fight for social justice. He's a director of collaborative education at Bronx Community College, and he has over 35 years of corporate nonprofit and education leadership experience. His experiences in these areas are tempered by a strong history as a community activist, entrepreneur, and youth advocate. Mr. Adams has participated in Bronx Community College partnerships with universities and schools in Senegal and South Africa. He has used African international education and service learning experiences as a tool for empowering New York's urban youth by coordinating trips for high school and college-age students. Mr. Adams has served as a consultant for many of New York's agencies, including the United Way of New York City and the New York City Department of Education. So with that, I turn over the floor to Mr. Gene Adams.
Thank you. Ladies. How's everybody? Thank you very much. That was great presentations. I really appreciated what you folks had to say and how important this subject is for not only women, but really for families. You know, anything that impacts on the woman is first and foremost a family issue. So I'm honored and to be a part of it. At some point, I may want to share the screen. So if you can kind of let me do that, that would be good. But I'm making this up some of it as I go along. But I'm coming at this.
Mr. Adams?
Yes, ma'am.
We can't see you, but I know we could see you before, so I don't know if
you know what? I cut my thing off by mistake.
Okay, no problem.
Face. You know, here it is. There it is. Sorry.
Thank you.
Cool. You know, this has been a phenomenal discussion, because it's something that I'm engaged in kind of like every day, you know, and is kind of a reluctant engagement, honestly speaking, because I never saw myself within the social work world as being, you know, a major direct practitioner. But no matter where I turn and all the other things I'm involved in, I keep coming back to the real life experience of engaging specifically young people and some of the major concerns that confront them. So this conversation is truly important, and the scope that has been laid out and what has already been communicated really kind of reinforces, much of what I've been thinking and feeling and trying to get a handle on. So I'm going to kind of handle it, I guess, looking at it from the perspective of the impact on children in terms of domestic violence. But in order to do that, I think there's a couple things I need to do real quick. I think the first one is that when we talk about child welfare in the United States, it takes on a considerably different construct than what we would be if we're talking about it in Africa. And one of the honors that I had some years ago, or continue to have, but I've started it some years ago, again, reluctantly, is one of my projects that I work with the Senegalese American Bilingual School in Dakar, Senegal. And it's a school, so I got involved to help develop the school, academic stuff and teacher preparation. But the founder of the school kept coming back to me as the social worker, because they were beginning to encounter issues and concerns that a lot of the Senegalese constructs and scope was not really designed for. Its children were bringing issues to school that related to outside of what the general idea of children in education is in Senegal. And one of the areas was that they were having more and more children come from the United States to Senegal to go to school. And some of these kids, or many of them, were actually born here. But the parents, for legitimate, of course, good reasons, were sending them home because they wanted them to be grounded in the culture, to have a sense of the fluency in the language, to understand where your parents came from. And they put them on a plane and they took them to Senegal. And that was cool. But the problem with it was that there was no preparation for the children leaving the Bronx and other places and ending up in Senegal. So the teachers and educators on that end didn't quite understand or know how to engage them because they were different. They had Senegalese names. They knew fundamental Wolof or French, but they didn't. They were also very much American. So it created some dissonance in terms of the teachers really not understanding these kids, because they thought some of them were bad kids or just rude, but realistically, they just were born in the United States and didn't know no better. But then we also found that some of the kids went home because the parents wanted them, of course, to learn about the culture, but they didn't give them any preparation. So they went from living in a 3-bedroom apartment in the Bronx or 4-bed, now living in the house of a relative that you barely know, and all those issues about security and sense of self that come along with that. I bring that up because when we talk about the impact of domestic violence or any shift in the critical shift in the family on young people, you really have to look at it more deeper, because oftentimes, specifically in the African context, kids are just fundamentally advised to go along. You don't have a voice. You don't have any say in this. This is what it is. This is for the betterment of the family. And this is what we're going to do. You just move along with it. Whereas in the United States, there's a different set of rules and laws that are designed. So kids who are brought from one place to another place, who have a cultural dissonance, who may not be fully fluent in the cultural and historical self, create, a situation where oftentimes depression and resentment and those kind of things crash in. They're also having a good time. And sometimes they don't even know how to admit they're having a good time because the way it happened. So my background, largely was in the protection of kids. So that's why I bring that up, because here, as we talk about domestic violence in families, we also have to talk about laws and rules that impact on children, because oftentimes children come into care because of domestic violence or other types of what we call neglect in the home. And that's weird in the United States, because the United States is, while we have all these rules and laws, they've also had a history of really abusing children once they get into the system. You know, so children come into the system because we're supposed to find relief for them in the difficult situations around domestic violence or a home life that's unstable. But then they came into a social system that was just as unstable and in many cases even more dangerous. So in the 1970s, they had something called Wilder versus Sugarman, in which they sued the city of New York and all those agencies that work with them, Catholic Guardians, Protestant Child Welfare, Jewish Services, because they were hoarding Black and Latino kids. So if there was a domestic violence issue or an issue of neglect in a family and a small child would come into foster care, the system, as opposed to trying to correct and support that family or find a permanent adoptive home for the child, created an industry where they held on to the kids and shifted them from place to place over a period of years. And those children never found permanent homes. And we're talking about, they may have come in at 9 months or even younger. And then they would, by the time they were 14, 15, they had seen as many homes, 12, 13, 14 homes, and emotionally, psychologically, they were severely damaged. So when we talk about African families and not being aware of how the system works, this idea of these social systems, administration, child welfare, and the like, are supposed to help families. But now you get an African family who doesn't know anything about how these systems work, and they have to engage it because of whatever's going on. It could be a real disaster. So I got involved in foster care and adoption and the permanent placement of children, and looking at policies that impacted on the welfare system, and became a tremendous advocate using television, articles, forums on adoption. I did one of the first male adoptions in New York. You know, helped the brother get a baby. That was really exciting. This was 100 years ago. I had an afro this big, long time ago. But so I'm aware of how that system works. And then I worked on a number of research projects called What Happens to Kids in Care. And these things are critical for the African family, because as African families have come to New York and similar places, challenges within the family dynamic have in some cases resulted in children ending up in care. It could be anything could flip the switch. And we all know someone could make that anonymous report. Oh, 3B, there's something going on in there. They make the report. By Monday, social workers standing at your door knocking, and they want to come in, and you're an African parent, you don't know nothing about this, and there's this white lady or a black lady or whomever standing at your door saying, we have a court order, we can come in. It creates a whole nother set of dynamics. I'm speaking now from the perspective of the university, where I have numerous African students, since I'm the advisor of the African Student Association, and I've created a number of contexts for African students. Now my young ladies, my parents, are coming to me over the last 10, 12 years, numerous cases where, because of dynamics between her and her husband, in some cases, child welfare has entered into the family and it created a sense of confusion that you would not understand. So I've been involved with the research. I've seen what happens to kids in care. Some years ago, I got involved with the computer system. For those of us who are aware of it, when someone accuses you of child abuse or neglect, it's a system that kicks in. And the first part of that system is called the preliminary investigation. And they have to come to your house, they interview you, they interview the child by himself, they interview everybody. They interview the guy on the street corner, they interview the lady upstairs, they interview people just walking by, they interview everybody. And they get that intrusive into your life. That system I kind of helped develop. What I can tell you about that system is that once you get in it, you're in it for 26 years. if they find that there is some quote unquote substantiation, your family is in that system for 26 years. Your name will stay in that system. So when we designed it, you know, we're working on it, I can actually put in your building and I can tell you everybody in your building who had a case. And I could even go into detail on what that case was about. That's how intensive and how developed that system is. This becomes important because, like I said, for a lot of African families, things such as corporal punishment or are kind of normal. You know, it's like, hey, yeah, you know, I had to tighten him up because he did so-and-so and he didn't do his homework. My buddy, a friend of mine, neighbor called, and he's from Senegal. The neighbor calls child welfare. Social worker shows up and it kicks in and they got to, you know, come back. And of course, him and his wife is crying. The kids are crying. Everybody crying because they think child welfare going to snatch everybody out of the house. And it was an anonymous false allegation. So what happens when you get a situation where because of there may be some issues within the family unit, you know, struggle, disagreement, some domestic violence, what happens then? And specifically what happens to that child? So I know from, you know, one of the projects that we developed at Bronx Community College, and I developed it in 2008. And it's been one of my biggest, most prideful initiatives. And that's something I call the African Services Project. Since 2008, I've structured a program that uses African social workers to work specifically with African students and some community people. But I designed the program to work specifically with African and Caribbean social workers so that we can begin to have a discussion about what social work practice is and how do we redefine how we act upon social welfare values and social welfare theory as it relates specifically to the African community. So for 12 years now, I've had about 30 African social workers from everywhere, you know, and they've been phenomenal young people. Of them, 90% have gone on and gotten their master's degrees and are, you know, practicing and have, you know, turned up in some very significant places as social workers. But what's critical here is that through the placement, I designed it so that we began to have and include the African context into the discussion about what it is that you do with families and how do we treat families, how do we understand families, how do we look at the cultural pieces that form what's going on. So the social work interns every year have to do X number of workshops on relationship, on children, on domestic violence, on all these kind of things so that we can understand it. So as they work with my students on campus who are fundamentally representative of the African community in the Bronx. And we have had cases that cover much of what we've been talking about. I've had cases of sexual assault. I've had cases of incest. I've had cases of, you know, just out and out physical beatdown. And of course, the one that kind of goes underplayed is verbal abuse. And what we've done over these years is with the social workers is look at that and how do we approach it in the context of working with African families. So that's been like a lot of fun. So all this is to bring us to now, in my situation, I've had numerous cases where because of the conflicts in the home and challenges and around domestic violence, we've had to work with specifically some of the females. 75% of my social workers have been women. So that's been like a real plus for me. And they've been able to engage all the students, but with special focus on the African women. Every year we do African Women Empowerment Day. We talk about the things that were spoke of earlier about how the American environment changes relationships. So the African wife she goes to school, she goes to work, she goes home to take care of the kids, and she cooks the meals, and she does all the other things that she's supposed to do. Whereas in many cases, if she was at home, she would have a network of people who would be helping her. But here in the Bronx, we don't have that network. So she's expected to do this all by herself. And the men, not all, but too many, fall within the context of they don't see the value of all the things that she's doing. And so that creates some of that discourse. But then another thing that's creating discourse, and I think was spoken on earlier, is that a lot of the women are being educated at a faster rate. Most of my young ladies are wives, and they're being educated at a faster rate than their husbands. So that means that she's going to get that degree in nursing or business or another area, and he's still going to be driving a cab. And that is beginning to create a lot of friction, because he still expects for her to be total line with the traditional context of what the relationship has been. And she's learning things and becoming more aware of herself and aware of her situation every day. So that's why issues like divorce and separation are increasing, you know, on this end in the United States. So when it comes back to what happens to those children, a lot of what happens under the guise of parenting also sometimes falls under other categories, because we might say it's parenting, but according to child welfare law, it's also could be neglect or abuse. A lot of times, because of the mother is working so many hours and the father is working, a 12-year-old is in charge of the house and is doing a lot of responsibilities that would be for an adult. In this country, that's the thin line where we start leaning towards neglect. I've had a lot of students who have a problem, and that is that their fathers verbally abuse them and force them to do tasks for the family while they should be in college. So a young lady has an 8 o'clock class. She's 20 years old, but the father insists that she takes this 6-year-old to a specific program in the morning, and she can't get to the university until 8:45. So therefore she's late for class. So it creates a whole nother dynamic, but she can't say no. So what do we call that? You know, and if she says no, then he'll verbally, if not physically, assault her, or worse, threaten to put her out. I have women who their husbands may have a permanent visa, and a lot of times the wives come later and they come on visitor visas and they stay. Oftentimes that man will do something like, you know, well, if you don't do what I need you to do, then I'm going to let them know that you're here, and they're going to force you to go home, and I'll keep the kids. Oh boy, you know, that's a big one. That sets off a sense of terror and a sense of powerlessness that the women feel. But the real deal is, adults generally, all adults, don't really believe that kids know what's going on. But believe me, by the time a child is 6 or 7, they got your number. They just don't say nothing. They know that you are, you know, mean. They know that you are inflexible. So kids know what's going on in the house, and they're scared to death. And that fear oftentimes leads to things such as depression, or, you know, some children just shut up and they just don't talk. You know, they sit in the corner and they'll do whatever you tell them to do, but they don't want to engage because they're overwhelmed by a sense of insecurity and fear. So all this, what I'm saying is, like, when we have these conversations and we specifically, we're talking about children, young children in a domestic violence situation, may wet the bed. You know, they may be 6 years old and still sucking their thumb. They may whine or just cry a lot. They may have difficulty sleeping. primary school kids, you know, 4th grade, 3rd grade, they may feel a sense of guilt because they know mommy's not being treated well. And they love daddy, but they also know mommy's not being treated well. So there's a sense of guilt that goes along with that. They may blame themselves. If I wasn't here, maybe daddy wouldn't treat mommy that way. And the key area is their sense of self-worth and self-esteem. Teenagers take it in another direction. Some teenagers act out the behavior that they see. Dad slaps people around. Well, hey, I'll slap the little ones around in the house. Dad beats mommy up. Well, I'll go to school and somebody says something I don't like, I'll punch him in the face. And what happens eventually? Those behaviors are taken into their adult life. And once they hit their adult life, that's what goes into their relationships. We only can do what we do. We only can do what we know. If we know better, we'll do better. If we don't know no better, that's exactly what we're going to do. So I want to leave some time now for some questions, but I'm just excited to have been a part, and you ladies taught me a lot. And I just hope that, you know, we can really take this information and turn it into a tool for impacting on families. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. So we have some questions in the chat. A few of the questions hover around the same concept, and which is, so now we know why some of these domestic violence cases happen, but the way forward, like what do we do now, and how do we empower women to stand up for themselves? How do we empower women to know that it's not their fault? And then how do we, the last question that came in is, how do we get men to, you know, accept their wives making more money than them and supporting them in that instead of being envious? So, you know, those questions kind of border around the same thing. So I'll start with Gina. So what can you say to us about the way forward, how we're empowering women, and what kind of conversations we need to have in the future?
I think it's important that what Dr. Asuji said, it's really an all hands on deck approach. It's, if you see something, you're saying something. If you're checking in with your family and friends to make sure that you're not ignoring any concerns that they may have. I think it's very important to start off in childhood. I think self-esteem, building self-esteem in children is really important. And also, a lot of these instances, you're not taught how to be in a relationship or what signs to look for. It's kind of like, just when are you getting married? But the work and intention and preparing a woman for marriage and relationship has to be a greater conversation as well, instead of just, you know, focusing on just marriage happening and leaving it there. I don't think enough of us know what healthy relationships look like at one point. And if you decide that, if you're quick to decide this relationship isn't going to work, I think there's also a lot of stigma attached, and women have to be confident enough to go against the grain sometime and do what's best for them.
Thank you. Dr. Hadisa, do you have any input on that? You're muted.
Yes, thank you. And that's a very, you know, actually, that's a very important question. So we had mentioned earlier, I'm just trying to, the question is, how do we improve the situation? And we cannot deny the fact that domestic violence, you know, just like Gina had mentioned, it can be complex. It can get, you know, complicated, but yet it is still, you know, it can still be ameliorated. It can still be curbed. And one of the ways, you know, they said a journey of 10 miles begins with a step. And one of the ways that, you know, it can be addressed is, you know, through this kind of platform that has been initiated. And, you know, and talking about domestic violence, educating people. And that is why really, though my task was to focus on the role of culture, religion, and community, I took a little bit of time to explain the different aspects that, you know, domestic violence can take shape. And so it is important for we as women also, when we get educated, to educate others and to have, you know, the right understanding, so that, because a lot of times people get, you know, run with misconceptions, and it keeps propagating and it keeps causing, you know, damage. But having, you know, a good understanding and using that to, you know, to educate people goes a long way. Now, when you understand the various ways and forms in which domestic violence can show up, and trying to, you know, whatever, anything you try to arrest in its early stages, you have a better success of curbing it. So when, you know, when the victims, you know, or before even you get that, having that understanding of the early stages of domestic violence, I mean, the different forms in which domestic violence play out, be it in the sexual form, or the physical form, or in the psychological way, having that. And once you notice those similar signs sort of taking shape in your household, then you know, okay, you need to try to figure out or try to take steps in arresting the issue before it escalates. There is a story I'm going to add with regards to this. And in addition to the education, you know, that we are getting, in addition to this kind of platform that is being used to educate, be it victims or, you know, women, or even men and women at large. And I am so glad Dr. Adams, you know, is here. And we probably need to get, this shouldn't be a woman alone platform. It should be men alone platform. Because when men also have a better understanding of domestic violence, and in the different ways, you know, it creeps up, because sometimes due to mental issues, sometimes due to, you know, somebody nature or whatever the dynamic is that is going around the man, having a better understanding of domestic violence and being engaged in this kind of forum and this platform. We have Victor, we have Adams. They can, you know, educate other men as well. And the men would tend to listen to their fellow men, because when a man is advising a fellow man, he will tend to listen. He won't feel like you're, you know, you're talking at him rather than, you know, you're talking with him. But if a woman trying to, it's a woman issue, well, in most cases, it's a woman issue. And if you're trying to talk to a man about it, then also that, you know, ego thing might step into, you know, the case. So one thing is to try to engage also as many men as possible in this kind of platform, to get, you know, to be educated, to be aware, and also for the women to have a better understanding, and also to know what are the right things or the wrong things around domestic violence. And with that, she'll be able to detect the early signs. And as the early signs creep up, she'll be able to arrest it. And there's a popular saying, and I'm going to answer you also this question with a story. You guys might have heard it in different forms, but there is this lady in the context of Africa. This lady, you know, of course, is going through some kind of domestic violence at home. So she went to the Babalawo. Babalawo is, how do you say Babalawo? What do you call Babalawo in American context?
Medicine doctor?
Huh? Yeah, the medicine doctor, or, you know, whatever, the traditional probably medicine doctor also, but we know Babalawo when we say it in African context. So she went to Babalawo. She said, listen, she don't know what to do, because, you know, her husband is being abusive, you know, he's you know, beating her and doing all sorts of abuse upon her. And the Babalawo said, okay, I'm gonna mix this concoction for you. This is a strong medicine, strong concoction. When you get home, anytime your husband, you know, comes and start talking and is getting heated up, just drink some of that water and keep it in your mouth. Don't swallow it, you know, just hold it in your mouth. And so when she got home, she's got this powerful medication. And when she got home, and of course, when the husband now came and started talking, she just quickly took the water and held the water in her mouth. The husband finished. Are you not talking? I'm talking to you. Are you not talking? She couldn't say anything. The water was in her mouth. And finally, the husband just walked away. And it continued like that. Every time the problem was she drinks, and the husband talked to her, he went away. At some point, he just gave up. There's no point shouting because she does not respond anyway. So when he comes, he just talked to her nicely. And then she quickly went back to the Babalawo and said, yeah, thank you. The medicine you gave me worked powerfully. My husband does not beat me anymore. No problem in the house. Thank you, powerful medicine. Then the Babalawo said, okay, drink it. And she drank it. And then she now said, listen, then you go and check yourself, work on yourself, because what I gave you was ordinary water. It was just ordinary water. To just hold your tongue, and of course, when he was talking. So, and also in a nutshell, another thing I would say is that trying to understand, the weaknesses, and trying to understand what can work in your home, because he who wears the shoe knows where it hurts. Right? Trying to understand where it hurts in that shoe. And then now you got to try things that would help to heal, that pain. My pastor, there was a time, in church also, and luckily with with our faith, because we Africans, we strongly believe in faith. And with our faith, when I was in church one day, my pastor, we're doing one of this women conference. My pastor was like, okay, and a lady brought it up, who is having this issue. And the pastor said, well, if your husband is shouting, threatening, and what have you, just say something nice back to him. And I actually tried that in my home one day. There was a time, sometimes, my husband came home and he was like quarreling. And then, you know what? And I looked at him, I said, I love you. And my husband looked at me and he smiled and he walked away quickly. So, that arrested the situation right there. And then if he tries again, I say, you're looking so handsome today. It helps. So trying to identify, what can work, and really running with that is very helpful. And the education, that's why I am so appreciative with this platform that Echoes of Africa is putting together. And I thank you for it.
Thank you so much. So we have someone who wants to speak. I don't want to mess up your name, but Miss Stephanie, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Hi. I'm sorry. I'm driving. That's why I can't really be on the camera. But I wanted to speak to what the person. I'm sorry, I didn't get her name, but the lady that spoke before me. A few things that she said. One thing that I strongly believe in is that men need to speak to men, and because it's not a woman's place to teach a man how to be a man. Other women learn how to become women by learning from other women. We don't learn how to be a woman from a man. And I appreciate that she said that, but I disagreed with something that she said with the that story with the Babalawo. I would say personally, I've been in an abusive relationship, and my mother used to tell me that story all the time, like, oh, Stephanie, if you just be quiet, then he won't hit you. And it's a joke because abusers have mental issues. Like, they have issues that they need to work out themselves, and that is not the victim's fault. That's not the victim's. It's not the victim's responsibility to conform to their ways of doing things because of their issues. They have to work on their issues, and that's it. I completely disagree with blaming women for, because if a woman is outspoken, if a woman knows what she wants, then that makes her undesirable in this African context, and in this what is it, patriarchal system. And it's incorrect. It's not true. People people love who they love, and they will continue to love who they love. So you don't have to be a certain way, or you don't have to be quiet, or what's the word? Like you don't have to conform for someone to love you. And I fully believe that people need to start putting the blame where the blame belongs, and that is on the abuser. So that's the only thing I want to say.
Yeah, if I may respond to that, Stephanie. So like, yeah, and so I totally, agree with what you're saying. And like I had mentioned when I was presenting that, listen, with domestic violence, there are, men who have been involved in domestic violence, and women are involved in domestic violence. But why also I had mentioned that we're talking about this because the significant rate is way higher. Most of the domestic violence that is occurring, it is perpetrated by men. And there should be the women who are victims should by no means feel they are at fault, right? But it goes a long way, even amongst friends. When there is an argument being, that an argument going on, and everybody is being heated up, it helps. It goes a long way, and it helps when one party just keeps it, sort of just don't say anything.
Do you know that when a woman, or not even a woman, when the victim does nothing, the abuser takes advantage of that and does more. So the more they get away with, the more they can get away with, the more they will do. So it's not safe to tell anyone to allow that abuse. It's safe to tell that person to leave that abuse as soon as possible, because the more you allow, the more they will do.
Yeah, no, we're talking about. Yeah, we're talking about the early signs. And of course, the more you keep quiet, the more it continues. No, we're talking about like when you identify the, early signs, ways that you can try to arrest it. And if that is not working, like I mentioned, it's complicated. It plays in different ways, different dynamics in different homes. In some homes, it's sexual abuse. In some homes, it's physical abuse. Some homes, it's psychological abuse. Just like you had mentioned, domestic abuse, it can be as a result of mental issue. So, and like I had mentioned also, he who wears the foot knows where it hurts. So, and if you now look at your, your situation, the situation your partner is not the type of partner that, like when I did, when I use that example, for example, when I played that role that I talked about, it worked for me, but that don't mean it's going to work for anybody else. No, it depends on your situation. And then also trying to identify the weaknesses that your partner may have and exploit on that weakness in trying to curb the situation. There are some, nothing is working. They are just simply abusers, and they just simply want to, batter a woman, just because maybe their ego is hurt or their pride is hurt. And in that case, additional steps or other steps, of course, need to be taken in order to help the situation.
Thank you. I think Mr. Adams had something to say.
Yeah, just quickly. I think the reason why I came up with the African Services Project was to begin to give the African social worker, and like I said, 75% of them have been women, tools so that they could begin to address issues. I mean, and abuse, domestic abuse is one issue. I mean, it's a significant, very critical issue, but it's one issue of many that African families are dealing with. And my thinking was that I believe that the answer to increasing the effectiveness of service delivery in the African community was to help produce African social workers who have a very strong concept of themselves and a very strong concept of their historical cultural identity and have a very strong understanding of the practice, theories, and philosophies within social welfare. And so with that, you know, I think that we need to begin to educate people. And I think there's no greater person for educating African women than other African women. Well, at the same token, we've been able to be successful with working with younger African men because we've created the dialogue that they haven't really had that often. So we've had this conversation where we talked about relationship issues and roles and those kinds of things that we would not normally have had. So we've had a lot of what I call micro sessions. Victor is on the line here, Victoria is on the line, and they, for me, were phenomenal as social work interns, working with families and young ladies and young men about these gender issues and the issue of roles and abuse. So I think we need to start educating ourselves and at the same time creating a African-centered social welfare approach within the American context that we can apply.
Thank you for that. We have two people with their hands up. Ms. Agnes, please go first.
Just before they go, I just wanted to indulge everyone's patience. Usually we keep to time with our programs, but you would agree with us that this topic is one that we can just cut off, and we underrated the response that we'll get from this. So we have to address everybody's questions. So if our speakers don't mind, just hang it in on our guests, just so we can address questions from people. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. This is a very personal topic, and it's even my interest for my research. So I do understand what we say that, oh, a woman needs to put water in her mouth to let this go, but men also can put water in their mouth. We cannot, this is not a debate that we can even suggest something like that in. I get very offended when I even hear something like that. I know that Dr. Suji is my personal person, but in that part, she failed me because I don't expect her to say, oh, you can put water in your mouth. There's no alibi for you to even, I mean, this is dangerous for everybody, whether emotionally, psychologically, physically. This is traumatic. This is something that touched our heart, our health, and you cannot in any way even suggest something like that as a professional. Now, from my personal view, I think that we cannot be empowering and at the same time even giving room to any incrimination. It's very hurtful to see that you will say, oh, you can put water in your mouth. Men never learn how to put water in their mouth. Thank God we have a man here today. I really appreciate his presence. And I hope that he doesn't only come to speak with us, that he's using his own platform to start speaking to men out there. We really appreciate this platform. I didn't even know something like this was going on. But I'm just saying that we have to really learn how to support ourselves. We live in a country that does not give us a chance to speak to somebody from our village every minute. We don't have a social structure that we have when we are back home. It's very difficult. So I hope that we use this platform further to always support each other. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one with their hand up, you can unmute yourself.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stefana Just Butler. I appreciate everything that was said. The person that is a Victor that spoke before Agnes, my main purpose, like my main point is for educating the younger men, even the older men now. I mean, everyone, you know, regarding this. This should be like an ongoing topic that we all, you know, my picture is on the forum because I'm at work. Actually, I'm in the bathroom, okay? So we should all educate, because the young men, you know, even as we're talking about the women being abused, the children that were there, you know, that are there, they're witnessing this, they're gonna grow up to be the same, okay, if nothing is being done. So if we continue to educate the young men and women, you know, actually, even when we have these discussions, we invite our young men and women to listen to this. It wouldn't be only our forum. It should be these young men and women that we have now that are even 5, 10 years old, 15, 20, 25, you know, so that when they get married, they know the right thing to do. Because if anyone, even though your parents, your mother, or, you know, endured, or, you know, depending on their cultural view or outlook, you know, the young person might not even understand the whole ramification, but you will get, you know, will get older and do the same thing, whether it's the woman that is the abuser or the man that is the abuser. Okay, another thing that I said also is, like, how do we bring this into African culture, our culture, even though we know this here in America? Back home, there are a lot of abuses. If they don't even call it abuse, it is like the norm, because a man's supposed to beat their wife, you know, to train them. You understand? You know, I mean, like, how does that happen? How do you train somebody? By touching that person, like beating that person, okay? Your wife's supposed to be your equal. Your husband's supposed to be your equal. It doesn't matter, you know, whatever that your culture taught you. But, you know, how do we get this, the men that are in Nigeria, in every part of Africa, you know, or even here in America, you know, to understand that equality, you know, that exists between a husband and wife? You understand? So once how do we get this program into Africa? You know, what do we do? What organizations do we talk to? How do we go to the government to bring up these discussions so that it could be in the mainstream? So we have platforms for discussions like this, so that the people in Africa will hear it, you know, at least start to have discussions, okay? So that's my own view. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Meg, I'll have you go next, but something that I'm hearing over again is collaboration, communication, and education, especially with the young ones. And I totally agree with that. Even when we're talking about how do we get people or men in Africa to take on this initiative, like, we have to look at the young ones, right? The ones that are coming up next and the ones that are seeing what's happening. And if we can get them to understand, men and women, that it's wrong, I think that's the first step. So I think the next step for us as Echoes Africa, like, this is something that we will be looking into. Like we said, this is not the only conversation that we'll have. So thank you so much for that charge upon us. So go ahead, Meg.
Thank you. Domestic violence is something that is close to home for me. Sometimes we only think that it happens to uneducated people or people that are not enlightened. And sometimes we think it only happens to women, but it also happens on the other side of the fence to men. But today we're actually concentrating on women, because that's where our topic, you know, takes us to. So as a woman who has suffered domestic violence, it comes in different lights. And sometimes, you know, our culture just like, you know, our speakers talked about, our culture makes us to believe that it's only when you're beaten, that's when you're suffering domestic violence. But as somebody that has lived through issues where you are told that you're not good enough, or you're told you are not doing enough, or you ask a question and it becomes a problem, and you dressed a certain way and it's seen as, you know, not good enough for you. And our society has, you know, made women to believe that they are not good enough, that the men are better. And that's where the topic and there has to be a paradigm shift. The society has to change their mindset. They should stop making women feel like they have to accept being second-class citizens, even in their own homes, in their own relationships. We are good enough the way we are to be loved and accepted. And that's the message that has to be sent across. And I want women, we are also helpers, you know, we are also helping the perpetrators of these ills. We are encouraging domestic violence when we accept that we are not good enough, that somebody has a right for one reason or the other because you didn't cook a good pot of soup for them to lay hands on you. That is wrong. You should refuse to accept when somebody tells you that, oh, you have a high school degree and I want someone that has a doctorate school degree. Well, you got me when I had high school degree. I know I have to better myself, but if you want me, you should love me the way I came. Then I can better myself with your support. And that's the thing that we need to. Just like Stephanie said, sometimes domestic violence comes in different lights. You don't have to say anything and something will happen. The mere fact that you are refusing to react will lead to you getting something said to you or done to you. And of course, we all know as women, domestic violence is psychological, physical, it is sexual, it's financial, it's verbal, it comes emotionally, where you have maybe a loved one, a spouse, a child even, who shows you that they don't love you. They tell you, they refuse to return your love by also telling you they don't love you. It is so deep. It's a topic that we cannot finish discussing today. And just like the person that spoke before me, in Nigeria and so many African countries, there are already talks going on. There are already organizations that are addressing it. Because guess what? Let's be realistic. Women have lost their lives over this, and they're still losing their lives. It is time for us to realize that this is no joke. People are dying. People are suffering. People are getting health issues, you know, because they are not speaking up. Nobody's listening. And when people listen, they tend to say, maybe if you did this, maybe if you had done this, maybe if you had bettered yourself, maybe if you have gone above where you were when he got you, then you would not have suffered what you suffered. So let's keep the talk going. And let's know that it is painful for a DV victim of any ramification to hear that if you have kept quiet or if you haven't done this, then maybe you wouldn't have suffered this. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more person with their hand up. So this would be the last person with their hand up. And then I have a final question. So let's move on. So your name's not on the screen, but your hand is up. You can unmute yourself. Okay, so we'll wait for that person to come on. So one thing that I have a question about, and I'm not sure if, I know we had Pastor Henrietta on the line. I don't know if she's still on or if we have another pastor on the line. I know we mentioned how religion comes to play. And I know there was a case, I think earlier 2020, this happened to a pastor's wife. And you know, when you're going through marriage counseling, they tell you don't let people into your marriage, right? So don't talk about what's happening in your marriage to outside people. And you come to find out that sometimes women are going through hell in their marriage, right? Verbal or physical abuse, and they feel they can't go outside the marriage to seek for help, right? So someone in the comment said, you know, seek for help. So if you don't feel that you can go seek for help because you've been indoctrinated or told, you know, don't share your business outside your marriage, what do you do now? And how What do you say to that woman who feels she can't go outside her marriage to say, I'm being abused, I'm being beaten, I'm being physically or mentally abused? What do you say to that woman who's so religious and so strong on that?
Can I please answer this question?
Yes.
I want to answer this question because I've been in that position, and I feel that no matter what, your safety and like everybody keeps saying it, and I think it's really important. Your mental health is more important than any marriage. I don't care what the Bible says. I don't care what the Quran says. I don't care what your religion says. God did not bring you on this earth to suffer, and God did not bring you on this earth for another man being human, female or male, to abuse you in any way, shape, or form, physically, sexually, emotionally, in any way. So I think that if a person is being abused, they need to. There's in America, there's helplines, there's hotlines, there's so many resources to get out of that relationship, and that is the final answer. You need to get out of that relationship, no matter what. That person, the abuser, has to find help, and women, and I say women because it mostly happens to women. Women, we are not psychologists. Even if you have a degree in psychology, like you're not going to be your husband's therapist. You're not going to be your spouse's therapist. So you cannot put yourself in a position to help or fix that person. That person has to get help and seek help on their own, and you have to find safety for yourself. So regardless of religion, regardless of not wanting to expose your spouse or take your marriage or your relationship outside. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You don't have to take it outside. You don't have to take it to anybody. But you do need to get safety, and by getting safety, it means calling one of these hotlines. Going into whatever program that can help you get to safety. That's my personal advice.
Thank you.
Hello.
Oh, yes.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Stella. Stella Azie. Good evening, everybody. I'm just very happy to hear all of what everybody has said. And fortunately, I'm in a group with Dr. Hadiza. Most of what we do, they're called Emerald Ladies. Most of what we do and talk about is this kind of issue. And I can say that I learned a lot of things from everybody that spoke. There are just a few things that I don't know if there was some kind of discussion that kind of indicated that religion tolerates this kind of thing. I do not think that religion does. I think it's a misunderstanding of religion, and it's perpetrated by people who have no problem having the man, what they call the man leading or just being on top. There's nothing wrong with a leadership of a man. It's just the way it's being abused. The Bible is very, very clear about this issue of submission. The Bible says the first thing the man has to do, the instruction is to the man to love his spouse as Christ loves the church. You have to love your spouse before you get any kind of submission. It is automatic. It comes automatically. When a man loves a woman, you don't need to ask. She'll do anything for you if she knows and feels. To teaching these things outside, I think charity begins at home. We have to start with our families. And again, these kind of forums are very, very important because it's very educative. There are certain things there are certain misconceptions about a man, the relationship between them. And children, I like what the gentleman said. that by the time a child is 6, you think they don't know what's going on in the house. They do know everything that is going on in the house. So we start very early on to showcase how we relate to one another in front of the children, so that they learn these things from home. It doesn't start from marriage. They learn how to treat a woman from childhood. Charity begins at home. We need to know how we talk to each other at home, how we express our love for one another, how we show love for one another at home. And it is only through love that this kind of issues will not be occurring in the level and the pace at which they are happening in the society. So it's, again, the Bible says we should love one another as we love ourselves. So I don't think the Bible is teaching something wrong. I just think it's the interpretation that is given, the way it is being manipulated by certain people to suit themselves. So it's a job that everybody suffers if anyone is suffering. We have to understand that. That's what we're talking about. The society as a whole, we all have to bear the brunt of abuse when that is happening. It may not happen in our household, but if it's happening to our neighbor, we might be called upon. It could result into you see, the African adage that says it takes a village to raise a child. When you see a child going the wrong way, as an elder person, you call that child to order, because we're not the typical, we're not like a society like here where everybody's like, you're not my mother, you're not my father. But a child takes a gun, goes into a mall and starts killing people. At that time, it's late. Something started somewhere before that child got to the point where they took up a gun to face the whole society, because the society let him down. So one way or the other. So it's a lot, it's complicated, like Dr. Hadiza said. There's so many aspects to this thing. But the more we talk about it, the more we get to understand it better. So I applaud every one of you, and I appreciate everything that I've heard today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that comment. Like many of us have said, this is not a one-day conversation. This is not a one-week conversation. It's going to take a lot more conversations and intentional work that we need to do as a family, as a society, as a culture. There's so much work that we need to do. But because of time, we must end this conversation. But like I said, we will continue this conversation at a later time. If you can just take some time to drop in your email or your Facebook information so that we can send you out information when we are having other conversations. I think we plan on having conversations with younger generation about this. So please drop in your information so we can send out information to you when that time comes. So once again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful speakers. Thank you for taking your time out to educate us a little bit and give us some knowledge and some things. Thank you for those who participated, asking your questions, just listening. And then we ask that, as the last speaker said, we're working on ourselves and we're working on our homes. Until we meet again, if there's nothing else, you are all free to go. Thank you one more time. And please leave your information in the chat.